Yes, I love this land. It takes my breath away.
Welcome to Texas 10. I'm Melissa.
And I'm Steve.
And we love all things Texas. We have been traveling the state and have been to all 254 counties. And there are stories, tons of stories in Texas.
Well, that's great because today we have a storyteller with us.
That's awesome.
All right, first I'm going to tell everybody that this is our first shot at a Zoom guest. And so our crack crew back there, CJ and Cross, I'm sure they'll make it work, I hope. But I'm happy to introduce to the Texas 10 fans, Kirby Warnock, an independent filmmaker who is, as you can see, wearing a proud Baylor hat. He's a proud Bear alum with us. And yes, Sikkim, thank you. And so we're going to talk about maybe the most Texas of stories today with Kirby because he made a film about it. And it's based on Giant, the film and the book from its name. Giant is as much about a place as it is an event. And that place is West Texas. So Kirby, first of all, thanks for being on with us.
Thank you for having me.
All right. And so since we're going to be talking a lot about West Texas, why don't we start by you telling us your West Texas bona fides?
Well, it basically starts with my father, my grandfather, and my uncle. My grandfather came out to Fort Stockton in 1915 and started a little ranch there. My dad was born and raised there. And then my dad married a girl from Mississippi. And marriage being a compromise, they agreed they would live in Mississippi, but we would go out to the ranch in Fort Stockton every Christmas and every summer. So at the time I was born, I spent 3 months out of every year out in Pecos County. We drive, it's a 2-day drive from Mississippi to the ranch out there, and we spent every Christmas and every summer out there growing up. And so I, just through my father and grandfather, I met tons of people out there. And then I had an uncle, Dr. Barton H. Warnock, the visitor center at Big Bend Ranch State Park, the largest state park in Texas, I might add. The visitor center there is named after him. It's called the Barton Warnock Visitor Center. And so between him, my Uncle Barton, my dad, and my grandfather, I roamed all over West Texas and met everybody. And to this day, when I meet someone, they hear my last name, they generally say, are you related to Dr. Warnock? I say, yes, it's a line of class. And then we'll go meet my grandfather. I'm always asked it because there weren't many people out there back then. It's not the hipster domain. So, there were very few of us. And so I met tons of people and got to go see a lot of places and people and things. And that's my West Texas bona fides. And 10 years ago, my wife and I sold our home in Dallas and moved back to the ranch. And so we've been living there full time for 10 years now.
All right.
I might be a little jealous because one of the things that has surprised me on our adventures is how much I love West Texas. And it's big sky, big country. It is amazing and is really probably my favorite part of the state.
And so that part of the state that Kirby loves and that you love, and I love too, was sort of revealed to the world in a very big way through the movie that we're going to talk about, Giant. And so I hope people are still familiar with the movie. It was 1956, I believe, that it was released. And so we're closing in on 70 years old, which is hard to believe. So for those that might not be acquainted with it, Kirby, why don't you tell us a little bit about the movie Giant?
Well, it was based on a book by Edna Ferber, and she was kind of the James Missioner of her day. She wrote historical novels and researched them meticulously, and then put fictional characters in real places. And James Missioner, did a lot with Centennial and Texas and South Pacific. Mm-hmm. So she had written this book, and George Stevens and Warner Brothers optioned it and decided to make the movie in 55. And so they wanted to make it in Texas, so they came out to Marfa and shot the location stuff there. But the rest of the film was filmed at the Warner Brothers back lot in their big sound stages there. But they went out to Marfa for 2 months in the summer of '55 and made that movie out there. And for most people, that is their idea of what Texas should look like. Mm-hmm. Because when I was growing up, there were all these John Wayne and Roy Rogers that said they were in Texas, right, but they really weren't. I mean, like The Searchers, it's all shot in Monument Valley. And Monument Valley is very pretty, but that's not Texas. And Roy Rogers the same way. So this was the first movie that I saw that looked like the Texas that I knew.
And so it wasn't just, it has a certain beauty to it that is acquired taste to some, but it is big sky, like you said. It's we think it's beautiful. But beyond that, there were beautiful people in the movie. So why don't you talk a little bit about who the stars were?
Well, yeah, obviously James Dean, because that was his last movie he made. And I like to remind people he spent the last few months of his life as a Texan. And then Elizabeth Taylor, who was the most gorgeous woman in the movies at the time. Rock Hudson, who was a handsome dude. And they also had a young Carol Baker. And, but those people, they were all Hollywood people that just looked good on screen. And they made that country look good, too, and everything. But they had three of the biggest stars at the time. I mean, Elizabeth Taylor was queen of the movies. Rock Hudson had made several films, was big. And James Dean was just rising ascendant. And a lot of people don't know this, but Rebel Without a Cause, his most famous movie, did not come out until after he died. Right. The only film of his that had come out before Giant was East of Eden. So really, he was kind of an unknown at the time. And then obviously after he died, they released Rebel Without a Cause and Giant, and he just exploded and has become really the first American teenager. He represents teenage America to this day.
And a cool teenage America. He doesn't really represent me as a teenager, but he's what teenagers.
I don't know. You kind of were.
He's what teenagers want to be, right?
So we all underwent a lot of the angst he did because you're struggling with, who am I? Right. What does it mean to be a man? That kind of stuff. I mean, he had a lot of the same struggles we did in adolescence.
Well, it was an epic film. I mean, and if you haven't seen it, it is worth watching because it is a classic. And I will say, I have to admit, and I've seen the film numerous times, but that's not why I fell in love with West Texas. I had to go to fall in love with it because it just looked so desolate, but then you had these beautiful people, and it was just the story itself was so great.
Let's talk a little bit about the area where it was shot. You mentioned Marfa, and Marfa, you mentioned the word hipster. I refer to Marfa as the westernmost suburb of Austin now. And because there's a lot of that sort of cool to it. But at the time, it was just a ranch community, and Hollywood coming to a ranch community like that, that's a lot of what the film's about. But just give us a general sense about that sort of collision of cultures there.
Yeah, and what fascinated me about this film, and the reason I got so hooked on it, my father took me out to the old Rihanna set when I was a 5-year-old boy, and it was still standing in 1957 and in good shape. And that was a 3-story building out in the middle of nowhere. Right. And the only other 3-story building in Marfa was the courthouse. So I was really fascinated by that and the fact that it didn't have a back. It was just the front. And I thought there must have been a fire here. They burned it down. And my mother said, no, they made a movie here. And I said, well, what was the movie? And she said, well, Giant. And I thought it's the attack of the 50-foot man. And you've got to remember that back then there were no VHS tape players. Right. When a movie came to a theater and left, you couldn't see it again. I mean, they didn't have any way to watch it again. And it was years later until I finally saw it at Baylor, believe it or not. It was broadcast on NBC one night, and I watched it. It was the first time I'd ever seen it. And when Rock and Liz pull up in front of that big mansion, I went, oh my God, I have been there. It brought like a flood of memories, and all of a sudden it all came together. But it wasn't until I was like about a 20-year-old man when I actually saw the film and put it together. That was where we went when my parents took me out there. And the thing about it was, back then, they did not make movies in Texas. They were all shot in Hollywood and pretended they were in Texas. Now they shoot films in Austin and Texas all the time. But back then, it was very, very unusual for a movie company to come out to Texas and make a film there. So the people in Marfa, it was a ranching community then, and it was during a drought, and they really they were pretty much almost broke. And when that film crew came to town, it put everybody to work as an extra or something like that. And then my documentary, Mr. Christopher, says it pretty much saved the town because we all just quit ranching and went out there and worked, and it gave everybody a steady paycheck. And so it was really odd that Hollywood came together with small town Texas, but in a very unpretentious way, because all the stars, James, and this is what I try to show in my documentary, all the stars were very approachable by all the townspeople. They didn't have any place they could go hide. It was very small. And if they went to dinner, there were the townspeople there. If they went to see a movie at the Palace Theater, the townspeople were there. And it was shot on an open set. George Stevens let everybody that wanted to come watch the filming, which now they wouldn't do that. They'd block it off with policemen and say, you can't come anywhere near here. But you could go watch it be filmed, and you could go walk up to the stars afterwards and get their autographs. But you got to remember, again, there was hardly anybody out there back in 1955. Right. It's not like now.
Mm-hmm. Well, so we buried the lead a little bit there and you mentioned in your documentary, and that's really what we want to talk to you about. It's called Return to Giant, right? And it was published or released in 1996, I believe. Is that about right? Okay. So, and it is basically the long story of what we're going to try and condense a little bit here today, just about how the film got made, what impact it had on the townspeople, how the stars sort of felt about that. What gave you the idea, and just a little bit about your journey to becoming somebody that could put together a real big documentary about something that's that important?
Well, at the time, I was publishing a little magazine called Big Bend Quarterly, and I started it back in 1987, and it was an attempt to be a publication about that region of Texas, and there wasn't anything being done about it then. And I got together with the Marfa Chamber of Commerce, and we put together a 40th anniversary celebration of the making of Giant. Mm-hmm. And all these people that worked as extra and all like that were coming, wanted to come back and be a part of it. And I was a history major at Baylor, and I had taken a class called Oral History that was just starting in 1973. And so all these people were there, and they were calling me on the phone saying, yeah, I did this. I was James Dean's stand-in, right? I was the caterer for all the stars. And they were calling me up saying they were coming. And I got to thinking, these folks aren't getting any younger. We might want to get their stories recorded while they're still alive and all in one place. And so I had a friend of mine whose son was on the same soccer team with my son, a youth soccer team, and he worked for PBS, a TV show called Wishbone.
Oh, yes.
The kids watch.
Right. Wishbone's big, right?
Yep. Loved Wishbone. Yeah,
he was one of the cameramen on Wishbone, and he was also what they call a second unit cameraman on Dallas. And whenever they had car crashes, he would film that. So I talked to him. I said, could you come out there with your camera? Let's get these people on tape, videotape back then, not digital. And let's get their stories. And so he agreed to do it. So I got back home and I started watching all the interviews. I thought, this is pretty good. We ought to put something together. And from there, I contacted Warner Brothers and went through a pretty arduous process of getting permission to use the Giant clips because they don't give that stuff away. Right. And when I finally got them to buy into it, they said to me, I told them, I said, I wanted to air on PBS because I thought this was perfect for PBS in Texas. They said, once it airs on PBS, we want to buy it from you. And I said, well, sure. And so at the time, I thought it was going to be on a VHS tape, but they said, no, we've got this new technology called a DVD. And back in, you got to remember, back in 87, there were no DVDs. It was all VHS. And they said, we want to buy it and package it on that. And so about a year after they bought it, they finally released it on DVD. It was a companion piece or bonus with the movie Giant on DVD. And that's what happened. That's how it all got going. And I was just very, very blessed, lucky, whatever word you want to use, that the first time I tried to make a film out of the box, I sold it to Warner Brothers.
Right.
Well, the first time Steve and I saw your documentary, we saw it in Dallas at the Texas Theater. And I don't know, the event that you had there. And so it was great. And Giant is a film that if you could ever find a theater where it's showing on the big screen, it is big screen worthy. And so I really enjoyed watching your documentary on the big screen as well and seeing behind the scenes. And I think what I enjoyed most is seeing the clips of the actors just as people. And like you said, James Dean, who had this reputation of being this really hard guy to work with, I mean, you just kind of fall in love with him. And hearing everyone talk about
That's
him,
why you fell in love with James Dean.
Well, in his eyes and his, all the things about him. But I loved hearing the personal stories and all the clips that you had of their interviews of, it just seemed like this film impacted them all personally. It was a great film and a great project to be on. And maybe James Dean's death also kind of brought them together. But it just made the story even bigger for me as I watched how they reacted to the filming of it and their experience. And I think getting them out of LA. Talk a little bit about that, about what you found about their experience leaving LA. And did that change how they looked at filming and how they, the experience for them of being involved in a film?
Well, yeah, like I said, to begin with, they were in a small town and they couldn't hide. They had to rub up against all the small town people. But as it shows in the documentary, the Marfa townspeople, they all really fell in love with James Dean because he was trying very hard to be a cowboy or a Texan. And so he was always hanging around people in Marfa trying to get ideas from him, said, how do you do this? Like Bob Hinkle teaching him how to do a rope trick and things like that. And he kept a horse on set so he could ride a horse when they weren't filming. And he was just, like everybody in my documentary says, he was just very approachable and very nice, He had this reputation of being moody and all, but he wasn't that way out there at all. And for them, the reason they were so excited to talk to me in this documentary, it was like, I'm paraphrasing, one of the guys in our film says this, it's like a spaceship landed one day and all this stuff happened. And they went to the best party they've ever been to, and they've been waiting 70 years for it to come back.
Right.
Yeah.
Because nothing like that has ever come there again out there. And they loved every bit of it. And they all talk about it with so much love and passion because they had a really good time that summer. And, it just never came back,
So I want people to watch Return to Giant, right? That's really what I want. But I have, and so I don't want to reveal a lot about, the specifics of the documentary, but what you were just talking about, the story of the young woman, I think her dad was the mayor or he was sort of hard, and James Dean approaching her through tell that story. It's unbelievable.
Her name is Betty White, and her dad was the mayor of Alpine, which is like 24 miles from Marfa.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And he had seen her out there, and so he approached her dad and said, I'd like to go out with your daughter. And her dad came to her and said, how would you like a date with James Dean? And her response was, who is James Dean? Like I said, his big film, Rebel, had come out.
Yeah.
She didn't know who he was, but she went out with him and just and had a good time and everything like that. But again, this is they were out there in the middle of nowhere, and he did the right thing. He approached her father. He didn't go hit on her.
Right.
But she had no idea who he was, and she found out later, who he was like that. But everybody knew who Rock Hudson, Elizabeth Taylor was, and in some ways, James Dean was the runt of the litter.
So, and just to sort of close the loop on that experience sort of lived on through another play and then film, Come Back to the Five and Dime, Jimmy Dean, which is based on, I believe, a group of women that would have been the people you were interviewing getting together sometime. Have you ever seen that film?
Oh, yes, I have. And it's very much based on not based on my film, not at all. That came out before I did this. But it was the same situation where a group of ladies became huge James Dean fans because they met in that summer. And so they had this, Jimmy Dean Forever fan club or whatever. And one of them is claiming she had his love child. But that's pretty much based on what I saw there with these people I talked to. They just, all those women just had a wonderful time. And like Darlene Freeman, she invited him to a party at her house, and he came there. And then, Lucy Garcia, she and her sister hung out with Jimmy Dean and Dennis Hopper. And then, like I said, Betty White Spidler, who, went out with him on several dates. And they just, they were still out there. And like the movie crew left, and they were hoping they'd come back one day. But they just developed a real fondness and admiration for James Dean. And yes, come back to the five, Jimmy Dean, Jimmy G. Come back to the Five and Dime, Jimmy Dean. Jimmy Dean is pretty much based on their experiences that summer.
So there's that, and then there's extensive interviews in your documentary with Rock Hudson.
Yes.
And so, I mean, that was, there's none with Elizabeth Taylor. So why aren't there Elizabeth Taylor?
We couldn't get her to talk to us. I tried and tried and tried. And I tell people this before I show the film. I say, she didn't say this, but what I'm reading between the lines, she did not enjoy her summer out there.
Was it a little rustic? I mean, I've stayed at the Hotel Paisano, and it's lovely. And I tried to picture who might have been in our room.
Right.
We had one of the rooms that overlooked the courtyard. It was great. So it was definitely one of the stars' rooms.
I'm going to say it was George Stevens' room, the director's.
Oh, maybe.
I don't want to burst your bubble, but Elizabeth Taylor, Ron Hudson, and James Dean all stayed in rented houses in town.
Oh,
I know the Paisano puts those signs up saying the James, but
you burst my bubble.
Maybe it was Dennis Hopper.
I liked Dennis Hopper. He was a great interview in your documentary as well. I enjoyed him. But I'm just, my point is, it's a beautiful hotel, and I loved staying there, but it probably was not up to her standards.
Well, and part of the movie is a culture shock for her in the movie, as her character comes from the East Coast and is out on a desolate ranch or whatnot, and she's not always happy in the movie either, so maybe that was just part she was hired to play.
She probably didn't have to reach very far to get the emotions of that.
She had three things going on. One, she'd just given birth to a child, so she's going through postpartum depression. She just had a baby. Two, she divorced her then husband while they were filming it.
Oh, wow.
And three, she was under contract to MGM, and MGM had what they call loaned her out to Warner Brothers. So Warner Brothers paid MGM a bunch of money for her to be in their picture. She didn't get any of that money, by the way.
Wow.
And so they told her, you've got to go out to Marfa right now and make this movie because we just loaned you out to them. So she didn't want to go. It wasn't under her contract. She just had a baby and just got a divorce. And also, it was during one of the worst droughts out there in history, during the 7-year drought. It was miserably hot. And so she had a lot going on personally, and it was not a fun experience for her at all.
It seemed like the guys might have had more fun than she did. They all seemed to enjoy it. And what I got out of Rock Hudson was he just really loved working for George Stevens, the director.
He did. Yeah, they had a mutual admiration society, yes.
Boy, they sure did. And so you mentioned Bob Hinkle, right? Tell us a little bit about who Bob Hinkle is.
Well, he was the dialogue coach on this, and he had gone to Hollywood trying to make it as an actor, like a lot of people. He was from Brownfield, Texas, a little town up near Lubbock, and he went out there, and then he got that assignment on that film to be the dialogue coach. He was to coach Rock Hudson and James Dean on how to talk like a Texan, how to get that twang and stuff like that. And he and James Dean hung out together the whole time they were shooting that. He wanted Bob showed him how to do a rope trick, and they went out and shot jackrabbits at night, and they hung out together. But he was really the dialogue coach for that film, and he never made it as an actor. He had a small part in the movie HUD, and he was the dialogue coach on that too. But that's his deal. He was a native Texan, and was on set to get the actors to speak like a Texan. And
he did a great job, I'll say. I do think they do.
Authentic.
They very much sound authentic. And his relationship with James Dean was just that movie, obviously, because actually James Dean died before they finished the movie.
Right.
And
he died while they were still editing. And he and Bob were supposed to go make their next film they were supposed to make together was a movie called The Left-Handed Gun, a movie about the life of Billy the Kid. And James Dean had already signed on to do that, and Bob was going to go with him to help him be a cowboy again. And James Dean had gotten a pair of chaps and everything, was all set to go make a movie about Billy the Kid when he died in that car wreck.
Right.
You know, and he died while the film was being edited and never saw it released or anything like that. It
Right.
came out of almost a year after he died.
Tragic.
Absolutely tragic. And the thing that I was getting to is the scene in your documentary. I'm not going to give it away because I want people to watch it, but the scene where Bob is talking about James's death is very affecting. I thought, wow, and that's been,
Powerful.
and it's been such a long time now, but
Well,
I still get chills every time I see that. I've watched the movie a million times.
Right.
And when Bob talks about losing Jimmy Dean, I'm getting a chill right now talking about it. That was real. We captured a moment on camera that was real.
Yeah.
Right.
I definitely can't agree more.
It was very moving.
Right.
Yeah.
So that's Return to Giant. When you were finished with it, they always talk about things that get left on the editing room floor and whatnot. Is there something that you wish that you look back on it and say, gee, I wish that was in there?
Yes, there was one thing I wanted to get in there, but we could never confirm it or track it down. Earl Holliman told us, and most of you remember him from Police Story.
Right.
Right.
He told us a story that while they were filming it, James Dean was out driving around Marfa, and he came upon a car wreck, and there was a young man who was injured in that car wreck and was laying on the side of the road. They were waiting on the ambulance to come. And when you're out in Marfa, there are no trees, there's no shade.
Right.
And so James Dean stood over him and provided shade to keep the sun out of his face until the ambulance got there. And Earl Holliman told us that story, but I could not find anybody to corroborate it. I don't think he was making it up, but I was trying to find somebody who could say, yes, I was the ambulance driver. And that was really a pretty touching story because here Dean dies in a car wreck just a few weeks later, and here he is helping somebody who was in a car wreck. And I wish I could have somehow gotten some kind of eyewitness testimony to that, but I just could never find it. And that's the one thing that was the one thing that got away. I wish I could have gotten that.
Right. Wow. And then the other thing I wanted to ask you is you sort of make the point in the movie that, and through some historians and people that are familiar with this, that Texans weren't real fond of the book Giant, but they seem to be fond of the movie Giant. So talk about that a little bit.
Well, the book was pretty hard. Well, there's two phrases. I've actually read the book, and there are two phrases that keep coming up in Edna Ferber's book. And one of them is, what littleness is all this bigness hiding? She said that. And she said, better for 20,000 people to own 5 acres than for one person to own 20,000 acres. She was not a huge fan of the oil-rich Texas. She thought, well, they didn't invent anything. They didn't make anything like, Alexander Graham Bell invented the telephone and Thomas Edison the light bulb. These guys didn't do anything. Just one day the earth opened up and they were multi-billionaires. So she was not a huge fan of how they acquired their wealth. And she mostly gave... I was really upset about the treatment of Mexican Americans, and she wrote about that extensively in the book about the Mexican Americans who were just reduced to peon labor on the ranches, and so that wasn't real flattering to Texans. But in the movie, the scene where Rock Hudson or Vic Benedict has to fight in the diner because the racist diner doesn't want to serve his son, who's a half-breed Mexican. That was not in the book at all. They added that to the movie. And so that kind of, tempered people's opinions of the movie. They said, well, maybe we're not that bad.
There's the good guys. There are the good guys.
Right. Well, right? And we all look like Rock Hudson or James Dean, right? That's
the good guys do.
The
cook was not as good looking.
And so just to sort of fill in the holes there, the book itself was written with Glenn McCarthy in mind as the Jet Rink character. And I think we've talked about Glenn before. He opened the Shamrock Hotel, and at one time he was part of what they might call the big rich in Texas. And there was Hugh Cullum and Sid Richardson and Clint Murchison and H.L. Hunt. Yeah. And all the four of them kept their money to some degree, but Glenn McCarthy didn't. And so that's, he died, I think, in a sort of frame house in the Houston suburb after having lived this extraordinary life. So maybe Edna Ferber had her revenge on Glenn McCarthy. I don't know, because he was super rich when she wrote the book.
Yes, he was on the cover of Time magazine. Mm-hmm. He was so rich, yeah.
And I do think that Texans sort of take it for granted today how much we influence the culture of the United States. But at the time of the book and the movie, that was something new. I mean, we were, the oil men, people were fascinated with the amount of wealth they had and how they spent it and all the rest of it. And that's sort of when Texas became known as something other than just a cowboy state, I guess.
Right.
Yeah.
Because Glenn McCarthy also didn't use his money to try to buy politicians like H.L. Hunt and the Basses and the Richardsons did. He basically wanted to have a good time. But there was another thing. All of a sudden, Texans, ultra-rich Texans, started having huge political influence. And that really had not happened quite a bit until the oil rich came along either, you know.
Yeah. Well, so tell us a little bit about just sort of the process of getting the movie together. That was 1996, and how it's lived on, and maybe how people can get to it now.
Well, that's a good story, because right now it's still only available as a bonus on the DVD of Giant. And here's the whole story. When I sold that film, there was a guy named Brian Robinson, who worked at Warner Brothers Home Video, where they launched the DVDs, and all the people at the studios, they were really behind this. And a guy named Leith Adams, who ran the Warner Brothers Museum, which kept artifacts from famous Warner Brothers movies, and they were huge champions of this. Well, right after I sold the movie and it got out on DVD, AOL bought out Time Warner. I don't know if anybody remembers AOL.
Yes.
You've got mail.
They bought Time Warner. Well, they slowly started tanking. They got bought out by AT&T, who planned to use the movie catalog of Warner Brothers with their AT&T U-verse on demand. They had some bad financial decisions, and they in turn sold it to the Discovery Channel, or Discovery. So right after I sold the film, when AOL bought it out, those guys that I'd worked with on this film got laid off. And then after AT&T bought it, the next group of people got laid off, and now Warner Brothers Discovery. So there's nobody at the studio I know anymore. And I've tried very hard to get them to stream this, but it has just not come to fruition because I don't have a name I can call and talk to. The guys I used to talk to are not there anymore.
Well, maybe we can overcome that with volume. We'll just get everybody to call Warner Brothers and say this has got to be made public, because it is a tremendous story. Both Giant itself, obviously people can probably find Giant, but it's just fascinating the interaction, the behind the scenes, and how the locals interacted and actually in such a human way with the biggest stars that were in existence at the time. And I just think it's a great slice of Texas.
Yes, it really is.
Right.
It is. And you can still go out to Marfa, and you can drive out to the site where they filmed it, and now they have these huge cutouts that are, no pun intended, giant of the actors. And so that's a fun little field trip to take. And then, of course, staying at the hotel and getting a little bit of, because the hotel, it doesn't seem like it's changed much since the 50s. Right. And so it has that little slice of Texana that we love. And I thought you just captured it beautifully in your documentary, and I really enjoyed it.
All right, so we're going to ask everybody to write to Warner Brothers and say free Kirby Warnock's movie, okay?
I'll give you the name. You want to contact George Feltenstein. He's in charge of Warner Brothers Archives.
Okay.
And I've been trying to get him to stream it for some time, and I haven't any luck yet. But, they just got when they got, anyway, they've been sold and bought out
Right.
3 times. I did this, so I don't know anybody there
Well,
anymore.
you know, how ironic that you think, oh, this is so lucky that they bought my film and now we can't see it.
Right.
So,
You can if you have a DVD player. You still can.
Right.
well, I'm going to email him
Okay.
or write him.
Right.
And so hopefully we can get our fans to watch
Right.
your
And,
documentary as
and
well.
they couldn't get to, if they're really interested, they can get to it by buying the giant, what is it, reissue or?
Yeah. If they buy the DVD, it's included. There's a bonus.
Okay.
Feature.
Right.
So it's still available that way, and they still sell those DVDs. You know, apparently a few of them every year because I still get a royalty check.
Well, that's good.
That's good.
Well, I love that you turned your passion into something that was so enjoyable, and it's been really great talking to you about that.
Yes. Thank you so much, Kirby, and we will see everybody again. Everybody else, please like, share, subscribe, do all of those social media things. Thanks so much.
Thanks,
Thank you for having
Kirby.
me. I appreciate it.
You bet.
About you, and I love this land. It takes my breath away. From Palo Duro to the Gulf Coast plain, from the heart of the hill country to the piney wood shade. I love this land. It takes my breath away.